It happened in the final week of 1945, long after the guns had fallen silent, long after prisoners stopped counting the days and started counting the possibilities of life beyond the fences. The war was over, the world was rebuilding itself, and a lonely American POW camp in the Midwest prepared for its last repatriation transport. The German prisoners lined up for departure, boots scuffing on frozen dirt, each carrying the small, worn bundle allowed by regulation. Some whispered to each other. Some stared straight ahead. Some looked back at the barracks that had been their reluctant home for years. And then one man stepped out of line. He wasn't young anymore. War had carved him into someone older than his years. He walked slowly toward a guard standing near the gate. The guard stiffened instantly, hand instinctively brushing the stock of his rifle, unsure what was about to happen. Their relationship had been professional, distant, defined by rules and routine. But the prisoner stopped an arm's length away, raised his hand, and offered a simple folded paper. The guard blinked. "What's this?" he asked. The prisoner spoke softly. In careful English he had spent months practicing only when no one could hear. "Thank you," he said. 2 words. No speech. No emotion breaking through. Just gratitude. Unexpected, unrequested, and entirely real. The guard opened the folded paper. Inside was a hand-drawn sketch of the camp's yard, the place where they had both spent years on opposite sides of the same war. Nothing elaborate. Just pencil lines, shadows, and the faint outline of a man standing watch. Him. The guard looked up, stunned. The prisoner nodded once, not smiling, not apologizing, not explaining, just acknowledging a truth they both understood but never said aloud. In that brief moment, 2 men who had been branded enemies by nations saw each other simply as human beings shaped by forces beyond their control. And then, as quietly as he had come, the prisoner stepped back into line. The transport trucks roared to life. The gates opened. The prisoners marched out. And the guard never saw him again. He kept the sketch for the rest of his life. Long before that final moment at the gate, long before the folded sketch passed silently between 2 men, the war had already carved deep lines into their lives. To understand why that simple thank you mattered, you must return to the beginning, to the year 1943, when the trains first brought the prisoners across the American plains. Camp Harrison sat in the middle of nowhere, a cluster of wooden barracks, guard towers, and barbed wire pitched against endless fields. It was not a place anyone would find by accident. The nearest town was small, quiet, and deeply curious about the unexpected arrival of hundreds of German soldiers who had once stood on battlefields oceans away. Most of those soldiers had never imagined they'd end up in America. Their last memories of Europe were smoke, hunger, retreat, and the cold fear of capture. Many expected cruelty. Others expected death. All expected the worst. Yet when the trucks unloaded them inside the camp, what they found was something different. Not comfort, but order. Not kindness, but routine. Not brutality, but structure. The Geneva Convention was respected here. Food came on time. Medical checkups were regular. Work assignments were predictable. And the guards, young, stern, cautious, were not the monsters German propaganda had warned about. Among these guards was Private Daniel Mercer, a farm boy barely 22, drafted into service and assigned to POW duty because of an injury that kept him from the front lines. He did not feel heroic. He did not feel important. His job felt like waiting for the war to end, waiting for letters from home, waiting to return to the life he once knew. He learned the rhythms of the camp: roll call at dawn, labor assignments by midday, inspections in the afternoon. He learned which prisoners caused trouble and which kept to themselves. And slowly, he learned faces. One of them belonging to a quiet German man who never raised his voice, never broke rules, and never looked at the guards with hatred. The prisoner's name wasn't important to the army roster. He was another number, another uniform, another man caught in a war with no direction left. But to Mercer, he stood out. Not because he was friendly, he wasn't. Not because he tried to talk, he didn't. But because he carried himself with a dignity that refused to break. He worked calmly during labor shifts, followed orders without aggression, and kept peace when tensions rose among the prisoners. And every day, as the sun set behind the guard towers, Mercer noticed him lingering near the fence, staring at the sky as if searching for memories buried on the other side of the Atlantic. One evening, after a long shift in the fields, Mercer passed by him while escorting a work group back to the barracks. The prisoner stumbled slightly, clearly exhausted. It would have been easy to bark at him to keep moving, standard procedure. But Mercer didn't. He paused, steadied him, and asked quietly, "You all right?" The man nodded, surprised by the question. He did not thank him. He did not smile. But something shifted in his expression, the smallest crack in the wall between guard and prisoner. From that day onward, a pattern formed. A held door. A shared nod. A moment of calm in the middle of routine. They never spoke beyond necessities. They never discussed the war. They never exchanged stories of home. They simply coexisted, two men stuck in the same waiting room of history. The camp itself continued its slow evolution. POWs worked on farms, repaired buildings, dug irrigation trenches, and helped local farmers harvest fields in exchange for fair treatment. The townspeople grew used to their presence, and some guards even learned bits of German to give basic instructions. But for Mercer and the quiet prisoner, communication remained unspoken. Not friendship, not trust, just a fragile, rare understanding, the type that forms when two lives run parallel without ever touching. Months turned into years. Seasons cycled. The war drew closer to its end. Rumors of surrender drifted in through newspapers and radio broadcasts. Prisoners began wondering about home. Guards began wondering about what came after. And then, in the final winter, orders came. Repatriation would begin. The camp would empty. Prisoners would finally go home. What no one knew was that the last moment between Mercer and that quiet German prisoner, a moment sealed with a single thank you, would leave a mark on both men deeper than anything spoken during the war. As winter tightened around Camp Harrison in early 1945, the mood inside the fences shifted in ways no one could quite predict. The war was nearing its end. Newspapers whispered of collapse on the Eastern Front. Rumors spread of Hitler hiding in bunkers. German prisoners whispered late into the night, wondering what they would return to: ruins, broken families, or the unknown silence of those who never wrote back. For the American guards, the tension came from another place entirely. The war had taken so much from them: friends, futures, time, and now, with victory on the horizon, everything felt suspended in a strange, uneasy calm. They were close enough to the end to hope, but still far enough to fear a final tragedy. Private Daniel Mercer felt the shift more than most. His days were predictable. Roll call, patrols, work details, inspections. But the prisoners had grown increasingly restless. Some became bitter. Some became hopeful. Some became unpredictable. And through it all, the quiet German prisoner, the one who had never complained, never caused trouble, remained steady, almost eerily calm. Mercer found himself watching him more closely, perhaps because routine had carved familiarity into something deeper. But routine was about to break. One evening in February, Mercer was supervising a labor detail outside the camp. The group worked clearing storm debris along a frozen creek, their breath rising in white puffs into the cold air. The quiet prisoner stumbled while carrying a stack of logs. Mercer approached. "You need a break?" The prisoner hesitated, then nodded. It was a simple exchange, nothing unusual. But two other POWs stood nearby, watching the moment with narrowed eyes. These were not the calm, tired soldiers who wanted the war to end. They were hardliners, loyal to the Reich, bitter about captivity, angry at any sign of weakness. They whispered among themselves in German, clearly unhappy. That night, the quiet prisoner returned to the barracks with a bruise on his cheek. No one admitted to anything. No one talked. But Mercer noticed. The next morning, one of the hardliners glared openly at Mercer during roll call, a look that said, "We saw you." And worse, "We saw him." The unspoken connection between guard and prisoner, fragile as it was, had become visible. And visibility was dangerous. As the days passed, repatriation orders grew louder. Lists were posted. Groups were processed. Belongings were inventoried. Mercer noticed the quiet prisoner was on one of the earliest lists to leave. And strangely, that made him uneasy. He wasn't sure why. He wasn't the prisoner's friend. He wasn't his confidant. They had barely spoken 10 full sentences since the man arrived. But in a world shaped by orders and fear, their silent moments had been a rare reminder of something simpler: decency. The trouble escalated when a guard named Thompson, loud, bitter, angry about being stuck stateside, began harassing prisoners more aggressively than usual. He barked orders, shoved men unnecessarily, and snapped at anyone who didn't move fast enough. Mercer had clashed with him more than once. "You're too soft on them," Thompson sneered one day. "They're Nazis, Dan. They'd kill you without blinking." "They're prisoners," Mercer replied quietly. "That's all. You keep talking like that and one of them is gonna make you regret it." Mercer said nothing, but he felt a chill settle in his stomach. One afternoon, during firewood detail, Thompson cornered the quiet German prisoner near the woodpile. Mercer saw the tension from across the yard, the stiff posture, the clenched fists, the prisoner standing perfectly still. "What's your problem?" Thompson barked. "Too good to follow orders now?" The prisoner didn't speak. He rarely did. Thompson shoved him hard. Mercer jogged over. "Enough. Get lost," Thompson snapped. Mercer didn't raise his voice. "I said enough." Thompson hesitated, then stormed off, kicking snow as he left. The prisoner looked at Mercer, really looked at him, with a mixture of confusion and something like disbelief. Mercer nodded once and walked away, but he didn't see the hardliners watching. And they didn't forget. The tension finally snapped 2 nights later. A muffled commotion echoed from Barack 4, shouts, a thud, then silence. Guards rushed in. Prisoners scattered to corners, pretending nothing had happened. At the center of the room, the quiet German prisoner stood alone, slightly hunched, breathing hard. His face wasn't bruised, but his knuckles were. Across from him, one of the hardliners sat on the floor clutching his jaw, hatred seething in his eyes. No one spoke. No one needed to. Mercer felt the commander's eyes burning into him. "What is going on here?" Mercer didn't answer, because the prisoner stepped forward and said something in slow, careful English. "It is finished. No trouble now." The commander studied him. "You're leaving in 3 days. I expect no further incidents." The prisoner lowered his head in acknowledgement. Mercer exhaled, relieved but uneasy. Conflict had ended, but consequences had not. For the next 3 days, Mercer saw the prisoner only during roll call. He seemed calm, resigned, ready, but something behind his eyes felt heavy, as if he was preparing for a final moment Mercer didn't yet understand. The final morning arrived cold and quiet. POWs lined up at the gate in strict formation. Trucks idled nearby, fog from their exhaust drifting into the air. Guards stood at attention, waiting for orders to load the prisoners. Everything felt routine, until the quiet German prisoner stepped out of line. The moment Mercer saw him walking toward him, he knew something was different. Something final. And the moment was coming, the one that would etch itself into both their lives. He walked with deliberate steps, not fast, not slow, as if each footfall marked the end of something he carried for years. Mercer felt the weight of it before he understood it. Guards around him shifted uneasily, hands brushing holsters, unsure whether to intervene or wait. The prisoner stopped right in front of Mercer. Men behind him watched, silent. Engines hummed in the background. Snowflakes drifted aimlessly between them. And then the prisoner reached into his coat. A tense ripple went through the yard. Hands tightened around rifles. Someone muttered, "Careful," but the prisoner didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. Mercer blinked. "What's this?" he asked quietly. The prisoner took a long breath, choosing each English word as if it might break on his tongue. "You were fair," he said. A pause. "You were human." Mercer opened the paper. Inside, shaded in careful pencil strokes, was a sketch of the camp yard from the prisoner's perspective. The fences, the barracks, the guards, and there, standing at the edge of the drawing, was a small figure unmistakably meant to be Mercer. It wasn't artistic mastery. It wasn't sentimental. It was honest. For a man who barely spoke, it was almost intimate. Mercer felt something tighten in his throat. "You didn't have to do this." The prisoner shook his head. "I must," he said. Before going home." He hesitated, as though wrestling with whether to continue. His eyes glistened, not with tears, but with the exhaustion of someone who had lived years compressed into silence. "You treated me like a man. Not enemy. Not number." Before Mercer could respond, the prisoner straightened, sensing the guards watching. He stepped back one pace, preparing to return to the line. But then something unexpected happened. One of the hardliners, the prisoner who had clashed with him in the barracks, muttered something venomous under his breath. It was loud enough for everyone to hear. Loud enough to stain the fragile moment. "Traitor." The quiet prisoner froze. But he didn't look at the hardliner. He looked at Mercer. There was no anger in his expression. Nos cham. Only the understanding that their moment, this fragile, impossible moment, was now exposed to a world that wouldn't understand it. Mercer took a step forward, instinctively ready to defend him. But the prisoner shook his head slightly. A small gesture. A final request. "Let it go." He turned without another word and walked back into formation. Mercer wanted to stop him, to say something, anything, but every sentence died before reaching his mouth. The commander shouted, "Move out." Engines roared louder. Trucks rumbled forward. The line of prisoners marched toward the gate. And Mercer stood there, sketch in hand, unable to move. Just as the quiet prisoner passed through the gate, he paused one last time. He didn't turn around, that would have been forbidden. But he lifted his right hand just slightly, barely perceptible, almost invisible to anyone not looking for it. Mercer saw it. A final goodbye. A final thank you. And then he was gone. No handshake. No exchange of names. No promise to write. No final words. Just two men, bound for a few years by war and routine, closing a chapter that neither had ever meant to write. The trucks rolled away, shrinking against the horizon. Snow collected on Mercer's shoulders as he remained rooted in place, staring at the empty gate. When another guard asked him what the prisoner had given him, Mercer didn't answer. He simply folded the sketch and placed it inside his jacket, close to his heart. Something had ended. Something had changed. And something would never be spoken again. When the trucks disappeared beyond the tree line, Camp Harrison fell into a silence it had never known. The war was over. The prisoners were gone. The fences still stood, but they no longer held anyone. The barracks were empty shells echoing with memories the guards weren't prepared to face. For the first time in 2 years, Mercer felt alone. He walked the length of the yard slowly, hearing only the crunch of frozen ground beneath his boots. The place felt unfamiliar now, as if the life inside it had evaporated overnight, leaving behind only the outline of what had been. He found himself drifting toward the fence where the quiet prisoner once stood every evening, staring at the sky. Mercer looked up at that same sky now. Gray, cold, empty. He reached into his jacket and unfolded the sketch again. The lines were simple, but the emotions inside them were not. He traced the tiny figure of the guard with his finger. He realized the drawing wasn't about flattery. It wasn't gratitude for special treatment. It wasn't sentimentality. It was acknowledgement. A prisoner saying, in the only way he knew how, "I saw you. I recognized you. You mattered." Mercer folded the sketch carefully, as if it were fragile. He slipped it into his breast pocket, knowing instinctively that it would stay there for a long time. When his shift ended, he sat alone in the mess hall. Soldiers joked, cleaned their rifles, talked about going home. But Mercer remained quiet. Every now and then he touched the pocket where the sketch rested, reassuring himself it was still there. Days turned into weeks. Repatriation finished. Camp Harrison slowly shut down. Mercer was reassigned. Life moved forward. People forgot the faces behind the fences. But Mercer never forgot the moment at the gate, the way the prisoner had stepped out of line, defying expectation, to offer a simple human truth in a world that had tried to erase humanity. Years later, long after he returned to civilian life, long after the war became something people discussed only in textbooks or documentaries, Mercer kept the sketch in a wooden box beside his bed. Sometimes, on quiet nights, he would take it out, unfold it, and sit with it for a long time. He never learned what happened to the prisoner. He never heard from him again. They never met. They never exchanged letters. They never spoke another word. But some connections exist without conversation. Some moments survive without memory. Some gratitude needs no future to matter. And in a world rebuilt from ashes, the simplest gestures, a sketch, a nod, a thank you, became proof that even in the darkest chapter of history, humanity still slipped through the cracks. In the silence that followed the war, two men carried a moment that no one else ever saw, and that was enough.